So, like, do you use the word awareness and observer and witness interchangeably? Because I see you stick to the word.
Oh, I'm so glad I'm so glad you're asking me that question, Guy. That's a kind of, I'm so glad you're asking me that question. I never use the word observer and I never use the word witness, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do use the present participles, observing and witnessing. Okay,
Right.
and there's a huge distinction here, and it has to do with reifying or making something of a process that's not personal. So when we say I'm breathing, for instance, we don't know who the I is referring to.
Right.
But if I were to ask you, raise your hand if you're breathing, everybody out there, you'd all say, of course I'm breathing, and you'd raise your hand. But frankly, if it were up to you to be breathing, as I like to say, you would have died a long time ago.
Yeah.
You're totally unreliable to be the breather.
Yeah.
You know, you're so distracted. You get a text or this or that or the other. Whoops, dead. So the biology of it doesn't, the phrenic nerve and the brainstem and the diaphragm, you're not allowed anywhere near the actual apparatus that keeps you breathing, because you can breathe right through your sleep.
Yeah.
So who's breathing becomes a really important question.
Yes, yes.
So if you make an observer or a breather or a meditator, okay, or a witness, you're making an identity.
That ego, that is.
You're making you're reifying a subject.
Yeah, you're bringing in a variable that isn't, now there's the facts.
Yeah, you're creating a separation between the subject and the object.
Yeah, okay.
The observer and the observed.
And do you call that duality or non-duality? Or
that's dualism.
So so it's not non-dualism, it's dualism.
Dualism. The
Okay,
non-dualism, I'm so glad you're asking this. The non-dualism is when you catch yourself in the dualism and you realize that it's like a magnet. You know, it's got a South Pole and a North Pole, but it's one magnet.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't get into like, I just want to cut the magnet in half and just take the North Pole. I don't want the South Pole.
Yeah.
Sorry, it doesn't work that way. They inter-are. So there's no subject and object.
Yes. But when you're, for example, doing a meditation and and the thought arises and you use the words observing the thought, should that be used in more metaphorically, because you're being the awareness
because it's a present participle, you can't use it to reify an observer. So I'm talking to a being, so to speak, who is capable of observing, but you don't have to make it I'm doing it, I'm meditating, I'm observing, because awareness has the observing function built in.
Yes.
It's like no you that making that happen. But we haven't been taught that in school. So we don't realize that we have a whole other form of intelligence that goes way beyond and is much bigger than thinking. Thinking is a fabulous, genius kind of superpower, you know, intelligence.
Yeah.
But what about awareness? That's even a bigger superpower, because it can take any thought, including how big the universe is or the multiverse is and how complicated, and you can
removes us from the equation.
You can do you know, whatever you want, you know. So, and when all is said and done, all of that can be held in awareness effortlessly without having to even go to school.
It brings it all in, the simple axiom. In its truest form. It's not
exactly. So then you see you have observing with no observer.
Witnessing.
And if I'm guiding a yoga session, for instance, I won't say lift your right leg or lift your left leg or breathe in, because then I'm using what's called an imperative tense, and I'm using command language.
Imperative tense,
imperative, where I'm using command language that basically says, I'm here, you're there, you do this. Okay, so that's robbing people of their own autonomy in a certain way. Subtly, they may not notice it. Of course, the military uses that in big time. But if we're all lying on the floor and I say, breathing in, I mean, I'm not commanding anybody to breathe in. It's like you're going to breathe in sooner or later because the phrenic nerve and the diaphragm and the brainstem are going to do it for you. And the same with the breathing out, and the same with lifting the leg. How do you know how you're lifting the leg? I mean, at a certain point, the leg just lifts, and we have the kind of conceit that we're doing the lifting, but we have no idea how we're doing that lifting. So what I'm trying to point to is this non-dual domain of understanding that who we think we are is not who we are. So the self, the one that says, I am the observer, that is actually a form of delusion.
And do you
it reifies
the ego as well?
It reifies a subject.
Yeah.
And mindfulness is a non-dual meditative gateway.
Yes.
So the more something comes up, this is why I think the Buddha once famously said, and I'm paraphrasing, that all of his teaching could be encapsulated in one sentence.
Yeah.
And I like to say, on the offhand chance that that might be true, maybe we should memorize the sentence, even if we don't understand it. And the sentence is, nothing is to be clung to as I, me, or mine. And the verb is to cling. So that's to self-identify, to sort of make something of the I, the me, and the mine, these personal pronouns.
Yes.
So when we begin to understand the non-reifying nature of the personal pronouns, the non sort of any kind of turning them into some kind of unchanging fact, but that they're just pointers towards a kind of ongoing, continually changing universe that we use the word self to describe.
Yeah.
Then we can begin to understand what it really means to be, and then how we use language, dualistic language, like I'm me, I'm myself, which actually can, if we're not aware of it, function as a prison. If we're aware of it, then of course, conventionally, you don't say, well, I can't go home because it's not my house. You don't lose your mind in that particular way. Although that's, some people do, where they go off the deep end of meditation and they don't know how to distinguish between absolute and relative reality. So we're talking here about the sort of deep nature, the deep structure of reality and the deep structure of the self. And there I've even used the word the self, knowing that whatever we say is the self. It's like one of those whirlpools I mentioned earlier. Where, it's real, but it's also empty of any kind of intrinsic permanent nature.
Yeah, it's funny how you say that, because when you write certain comments in the Facebook group, someone will point you out, you said that word, where even though the intention was that, because you slip up on a word where you kind of you include the I or the self in a certain way, you'll get people jumping in.
Well, it's good that people are catching
It's easy to forget though.
Slip up.
Yeah. The idea is there.
So there's a certain way in which mindfulness is requiring us to be mindful of how we language things.
Yes.
And notice I'm even using the word language as a verb, and I do that a lot.
How we
language things.
Yeah.
Okay, because you can language them totally dualistically, or you can conventionally realize that we have to, in some sense, use the language of I, me, and mine, and self, and so forth. But we can actually language it in ways that point to our recognition that it's empty of any kind of reality. It's just a conventional kind of a convention that we agree upon, but that it's not a core reality.
Yeah.
Is this making sense to you?
No, absolutely. I think we should do another podcast where we just go deep on the non-duality, when we talk about awareness versus
made
observation.
Me very happy asking that question. You could see that.
Yeah, because I think there's, especially when you've been meditating for a while, these are genuine questions that pop up into your mind. And when you're trying to explain it to someone and they bring up, well, awareness versus observing versus the witness. Well, why is there a distinction? What is the umbrella term, and why is that important?
Yeah, and I
And that
think we
helps.
just answered it.
Yeah,
I
yeah, we
think
did, absolutely. But I think
we just answered that.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you so much for doing that. But I would love to dig your brain on a lot of these subjects where it's more,
well, by all means,
esoteric, but it's like, well, we take it and we just go a bit, when we talk about the word ego, because a lot of people use it to mean, oh, you're being egotistical in a more of a narcissistic kind of selfish way, versus the idea that you're actually considering yourself as a physical form versus, this consciousness that's connected with everything, right? And what does that mean? And is that even true? And just kind of talk about it, and just explore some of those conversations, that I think that would be fascinating.
I'm happy to do that once or twice a year. I'd be happy to do that with you. I mean, and again, you just asked probably the most important question of all. And if people are not entirely understanding of the answers that I've given, and I've given multiple sort of approaches to it, that's okay, because this is something that the thinking mind alone will never figure out, because the thinking mind is limited. But if you hold the not knowing in the awareness and be the knowing that the not knowing actually is, and I know that sounds like insane talk, but follow
you say many times,
be the knowing that the not knowing actually is, then you'll understand something about the power of awareness.
Yes.
Because knowing what we don't know is really wisdom. And it can give rise to incredible creativity and works of imagination when you just trust that it's all available to you. I won't say it's all inside you, because I don't want to make a boundary between inside of you and outside of you, really. Because in a certain way, you're a product of the whole universe.
Exactly.
And you're not, all of us are, and we're not that explainable. But between life and death, or birth, between birth and death, we have an incredible opportunity to actually wake up and realize the full dimensionality of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And it's a very brief opportunity.
Yes. So before I hand it over to Jonathan to see us out with the last question, do you see, when you explain mindfulness, almost like trying to explain quantum mechanics to someone that isn't aware of what quadratic equations are or what algebra is? So before we can talk about algebra, we need to understand the axioms of a plus b equals b plus a, and the simple mathematics. Because when I try to explain mindfulness to someone that's never practiced it before, it's like trying to explain, I mean, do you see it akin almost to something like an issue of communication? Because you could tell the smartest minds, the depths of knowledge and learning from your years of experience in exploring the laboratory of your own mind and mindfulness. But then without someone having actually experienced that first step of, oh wow, just to sit with your thoughts and just to realize some of the chaos and the repetition and the randomness, and then without that, the struggle of being able to explain them, some of the stuff that we learn later down the road. I mean, is it necessarily you have to stand on each previous block in order? And if you haven't stood on those blocks, that the ability to truly get, when you're talking about non-duality or awareness versus witnessing and observation, that without those steps beforehand, you are unable to appreciate. Yeah, you're unable to appreciate. And even if we explained it all day long the vernacular where you understood every word, but without really having experienced those earlier stages, and I don't want to call them stages like there's a process or something, but there's almost without going through the wonders of all that, for you to, it's like quantum mechanics. No, you need to understand quadratics first, and then basic algebra, and then multiplication, addition, etc.
You should be teaching yourself all this stuff.
Well,
I mean,
that's
really,
what I'm going
that's
to,
beautifully said. Look, some people actually talk about meditation as kind of like the Hubble Space Telescope. that if you really want to look into the deepest nature of the universe, and the deepest nature of the human mind, there's nothing more powerful at the moment than the Hubble Space Telescope, except soon there'll be the James Webb Space Telescope, which will make the Hubble look like, child's play. But with meditation, with mindfulness, that's the Hubble, that's the practice, is the Hubble telescope. So so without reifying now the Hubble telescope, what you're saying and what you're intimating is that this is so deep that it's like, hey, what kind of preliminaries do you need? And in certain traditions, there's all sorts of stages and preliminaries that you go through before you, progress through various kinds of stages. And that's one very venerable tradition of teaching wisdom or mindfulness or meditation. But I have not followed that route. I go much more with the non-dual Zen or Chan tradition in China, where it's beyond name and form, and it's beyond all the written instructions and sutras and commentary and all that. Direct perception transcending name and form. Okay, direct transmission, it's called, outside the teachings. The direct perceiving beyond name and form. So that's something we're born with. And we can help each other to develop, because it's an arduous practice to wake up. It's not like, thanks for telling me, breathe in, breathe out. Now I'm free from all of my suffering and the causes of suffering. This is like a lifetime's work, at least. And so many people can study the stages, because everything's available on the internet now, and there are phenomenally wonderful teachers out there in all of the various, Tibetan schools and in different schools of Buddhism. But most people are not going to understand that. And it will take them 20 lifetimes to kind of get up to the quantum mechanics, so to speak. Do you know what I'm saying? Or the Hubble Space Telescope. And the irony is that they're already the Hubble Space Telescope. Every single one of us is. So these are some of the kind of interesting ways in which the Dharma, or the lawfulness of the universe, is made available to a wide range of different kinds of temperaments and people in different stages of life in different places in the world. And some people will be attracted to, mindfulness with me, and other people will be repelled by mindfulness, as Jon Kabat-Zinn talks about it. But they'll find somebody else that says, this person makes total sense. And it doesn't matter which door you go into, because they're all different doors into the same room. And we're all just beginning. We're all like not even in kindergarten. This is daycare. But we got to go through some door, and then, enjoy the daycare and see what emerges.